Holy Chapel service will start in...
When the world seems cold and your friends are few, there's someone who cares for you. When disappointment rise, sometimes the tears fill your there's someone who cares for you. There's someone who cares. I got someone to share. Someone I can tell all my problems to. Whoa. He'll come down from the sky, sure wipe your tears from your weeping eyes. If you his child, he cares for you. Someone I know God cares. I got someone to share. Someone I can tell all my problems to. Whoa. God will come down from the sky. Surely he'll wipe your tears from your eyes. You're his child. He cares for you. Someone, sure wish I had a witness. He cares. I got someone I know he's willing to share. Someone I can tell all my problems to. God will come down. So wipe your tears from your weeping eyes. You his child, I know he cares. You his child, I know God really cares. You his child, he cares. Truly, I'm a living witness that God cares. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, can't nobody do us like Jesus. I'm a living witness. I want you to come with me today to the Gospel of St. Mark, chapter number 14. And I'm going to be reading a litany of verses into your hearing, beginning at verse number 1. And continuing through the 11th verse. I'm reading today out of the NIV version, and so make the necessary adjustments in your text in order to follow me. Mark 14:1 says, Now the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread were only 2 days away. And the chief priests and the teachers of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or the people may riot. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, why is this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor. And they rebuked her harshly. Are you with me? Leave her alone, said Jesus. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want. But you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly, I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in her memory of her. Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted to hear this and promised to give him money. So he watched for an opportunity to hand him over. I want to talk from this thought and subject matter today. God has a plan. Have you ever found yourself behind the proverbial 8-ball, if you will, and could not even fathom how you might be able to overcome its hindrances? Have you ever found yourself at your wit ends, and just when you thought all hope was gone, some way or the other, God got a message of blessing to you? Have you ever found yourself in a travesty where the pain perhaps and the difficulties of overcoming escaped one's personal comprehension, but while you were trying to figure it out, God was busy working it out? It's here in a text like this that we find the value of being able to place confidence in God. Because when you are trying to figure it out, God is already busy working things out. In this state of crisis that we find ourselves in right now, I'm inclined to remind every believer not to despair, because God got a handle on this thing. You may not be able to see it, but faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. Someone says a few days ago, well, if God said it, I believe it, and that settles it. And that might be all right with antiquated philosophy, but I want you to know that in this day of modern technology, you have to do more than keep up. Do I have a witness? You got to have some foresight. And therefore, you have to know that God is working it out even if you can't see it. Someone said, if God said it, I believe it. But I want you to know that if God said it, you don't have to believe it. Do I have a witness? Because whatever God said is always settled, even when he says it. He has the ultimate power. I wish I had a witness here. He is not just eminently inclined, but he was preeminently involved. Even before you got here, he was working things out. Even before the pandemic fell, God was working it out. We may not have all the ins and outs of how, but God said his ways are as far above our ways as the heavens are from the earth. And so all we have to do is to just trust God, that whatever he does, he's working in our best interest. It's here in this beautiful piece of pericope that I share with you this morning that the obstacles seemingly are twofold. One, we find that they were at a state of the Passover. And being at a state of the Passover, Jesus used this opportunity to communicate with his people in a way that only those who knew him would be able to understand him. According to this gospel, in the 14th chapter of Mark, it also pays homage to the Gospel of Matthew in his 26th chapter, in verse number 2, where Jesus had predicted that his crucifixion was to take place in 2 days, which would have been Friday on that day, since he was speaking on a Wednesday evening, no doubt at a prayer meeting, Mark's timeline is the same as Matthew's timeline. Friday of Passover, which would have begun on Thursday at sunset. The Passover commemorated the passing over of the homes of the Israelites by the death angel, who was commissioned by God to upset some stuff. And because of the hardness of Pharaoh's heart and his desire to annihilate the people of God, he told Moses to go and kill a lamb, catch his blood in a basin, take a hyssop, and dip it in the blood and just paint the doorposts of every home. Grandmother would say it like this: what goes around comes around. Where Pharaoh was threatening the Israelites with threats of annihilation, God said, make certain that your doorposts are stained. I wish I had a praying church, because tonight there's going to be some trouble in the city. I'm going to let loose an angel of death. And I want you to know that even in the pandemic, folk are dying. But I need you also to know that there are some folk that are escaping. Some are leaving here, meeting him. Others may be leaving him to an awful fate of eternal separation from him. But he said, when the death angel shall fly, there would be a sign on the doorpost that if he sees the blood of the lamb, he'll just fly over. And don't mean any harm, but God is such a good God until even now we don't recognize that he's flying over some houses. Can I get a witness? It could have been you, it could have been me, it could have been any of us, but because of our devotion to God and his love for his own, he blesses us with his grace and his mercy. Grace favoring us with something that we really didn't deserve, but mercy protecting us from something that we should have received. And so it was here during this time of Passover, which began on the 14th day of Nisan, which is the first month of the Jewish calendar, with the slaughtering of the Passover lamb and continuing into the early hours of the 15th day, the feast of the unleavened bread. This feast commemorated the departure of the Israelites from Egypt. You need to know that it's important when we eat the Passover, because it reminds us that God has blessed us one more time to receive something that we really didn't deserve. The slaughtering of the Passover lamb, as it continued, the Feast of Unleavened Bread began, and the feast commemorated the departure of the Israelites from Egypt, and I don't mean any harm. But for some folk, you can get them out of Egypt, but you can't get the Egypt out of them. Do I have a witness? And so we have much to consider today as we look at the text and understand what God is doing. It began immediately after the Passover. It lasted not just throughout the 14th day of Nisan, but the 15th through the 21st day. Unleavened bread refers to the type of bread that the Israelites were to take with them on their route to escape, which represented the absence of the leaven of sin in their lives. But the truth be known is that when God hardened Pharaoh's heart and started shaking up stuff, he was also liberating other folk, and they were leaving in a hurry. So much so until on their route to the promised land, their meal preparation was prepared by God. Even the bread that they received, they didn't have time enough to have it spiced with leaven so that it might rise. They just ate the bread unleavened and was in a hurry. Throughout their quest to get to a better place, God took them through some wilderness. And I don't mean any harm, but until you can appreciate, Lord help me, where you've been, you don't know how to appreciate where God is trying to get you to. Sometime, if it were not for hard knocks, we never would have come this far. Some of us, if it had not been for trouble in our way, we never would have come to the Lord. Others of us, if it had not been for the Lord on our side, we never would have turned around. We would have continued in the wilderness. A wilderness trip that should have taken only a few days caused many of them that had hardened hearts among the remnant of God's people to travel for 40 years just trying to get to the land of promise. God was so generous until he led them by a pillar of fire by night and a cloud by day. God was so good until he would rain down manna on the ground, tell every family to come get and eat. And I want you to know that even so, some along the way got so angry with God until they took it out on Moses and asked what was this stuff. Somebody looked at it and said, this looked like some light bread. I wish I had a witness. I know that perhaps there's some of you that don't know what light bread is, but I made many a trip to the store to get some light bread. Anybody with me here? They argued and they grumbled. They could not understand what was going on, even though God blessed them that the clothes on their backs wouldn't wear out and the shoes on their feet wouldn't give way, and yet they complained. Some had the audacity to tell Moses, were there not graves in Egypt? Do I have a witness? Well, the people of God are not concerned about graves. We're concerned about life. The Bible says that he sent us that we might have life and that we might have it more abundantly. Do I have a witness here? And so here we find the escape route, which represented their quest to get to the new land. Not doing much to thank God at the time, but because the Passover had to be celebrated in Jerusalem, the city would have been overflowing. Perhaps as many as 2 million people were there in the city, and many would have been from Galilee, an area where Jesus had many followers of the faith there. But Mark says here in his gospel, that during this preparation for the festival of unleavened bread, it was only 2 days out when the priests and the teachers of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus, to kill him privately and secretly. They didn't want to do it in the open because the Passover was about to begin and be too many folk around to witness it. But the devil thought he had a plan. But God had already counted the devil in his plan. You know, sometime when you really make up your mind that you're going to live for Jesus, you have to also factor in the possibility, in fact, the probability that before this plan come to fruition, the devil gonna show up. Do I have a witness? Isn't it ironic how we who know the Lord and who have been tried by him time and again get so surprised when the devil shows up? You ought to know that he's coming. He's coming. If he doesn't come one way, he's coming another way. But he is coming. And you ought to know that God has a plan for him. And he who has called you out of darkness into the marvelous light, when the devil shows up, just tell him, get that for me. Do I have a witness here? Just tell him that this is a matter for you. Yes, it's here. And that we also recognize that the leaders did not want to start a riot. And they were determined to wait until after the Passover season was over and the crowds would be diminished and people would be on their way home, but they really wanted to get to Jesus. The incident recorded here, it talks about how it occurred the previous Saturday. It is Mark's accounting of the anointing of Jesus by Mary in the preparation of his crucifixion in this particular pericope. I want you to take note now that we're talking about Mary, who is also the sister of Martha, the sister of Lazarus. Mary, who lived in Bethany. And Jesus here was at the house of Simon the leper. Now, the contrast that I want to employ is important because as you begin to study the narration of the same, you're going to see that over in the 7th chapter of Luke, there is also another mentioning of a meeting with Jesus in the household of one by the name Simon. Look at your neighbor and say, it's not the same man. You see, a lot of people think just because they got the same name that they're the same man, same person. But, you know, there are a whole lot of people that have similar names. Don't mean any harm. There's a lot of Jose's. There's a lot of Georges. Do I have a witness? But you got to make certain you know who you're talking about. Just as a matter of record for your ability to differentiate the two, in this 14th chapter of Mark, we're talking about one by the name Simon who was known as a leper. In the 7th chapter of Luke, however, you find a Simon that was also visited by Jesus, who was also met with a woman who anointed him in a special way. But this was Simon the Pharisee. Simon the Pharisee is different from Simon the leper. They're not the same man. And Mary that you find in Mark, Matthew, and John is not the woman that you see in the 7th chapter of Luke. The woman that you see in the 7th chapter of Luke came and stood behind Jesus at the home of Simon the Pharisee. Simon the Pharisee was one that reluctantly received Jesus. He was a Jew, you know. And being a Pharisee, he raised the question in that 7th chapter when he was at meat with Jesus, trying no doubt to find an angle by which he can accuse Jesus of impersonating, or lying, if you will. As he was at meat with Jesus, this is the Pharisee, there was a woman that came in. It stood behind Jesus as he sat at meat with Simon the Pharisee. She was crying profusely, so much so until her tears ran down her face and fell on the feet of Jesus, and she knelt down and took her hair and dried the feet of Jesus. Simon the Pharisee looked around and made the statement that if this man is really a prophet like they say he is, he should have known who this woman was. This woman was a prostitute. This woman was a lady of the evening, if you will. The good thing about it is that she found her way to Jesus. And not only found her way to Jesus, but she was contrite in her quest to be forgiven. She cried. And Simon the Pharisee says, you know, if he's a prophet, y'all, you would think that he would know who she is, who's touching him. You see, being a Pharisee and a Jew, the Pharisee would never, watch this, openly be seen with a woman of the evening like that, because it would automatically render them ceremonially unclean. And you know they had to keep their image and their posture up. But when this woman heard that Jesus was at his house, she showed up. It was not uncommon for when people of great reputation are in town and you are visiting as a distinguished guest at one of the Pharisees' house, that others would come and want to spy in on your guests and on your company. But no, he has the audacity to accuse Jesus. I'm talking Luke 7. He has the audacity to accuse Jesus of not knowing who she was. If you're a prophet, you know, you should know who it is that's touching you. Well, notice that the woman didn't have any difficulty finding her way in the house. Y'all will get that after a while. And while he was criticizing Jesus, how did he know her so well? And Jesus said, Simon, I need to have a talk with you. But you know, we have to understand how to differentiate between the texts in order to discover the true strength of the narratives. First of all, this woman that was at Simon the Pharisee's house was there at a different time, and she was in his house. He lived in Galilee. The woman in Matthew, Mark, and John could not be Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus. It could not be Mary. Why? They lived in Bethany, about 26 miles south of Judea. so distinctively. There's two different people. Well, remember in the 9th chapter, is it the 11th chapter? You remember when Jesus went to Bethany when Lazarus when they sent for Lazarus because he was sick? You remember that? And you remember that Martha was giving Jesus the what for? Because she felt like he should have been here. Mary was quiet, but she was in the kitchen. And so now let's look at it again. Chances are they were not guests at Simon the Pharisee's house, but they were guests at Simon the leper's house. Being at Simon the leper's house, they probably were hosting the meal for Simon, who was probably no longer a leper, because you can't be the same once you meet Jesus. Come on, help me somebody. And so while in the house of Simon the leper, Mary opens up a very expensive box, an alabaster box of oil, of perfume, if you will, and began to anoint Jesus. And when she began to anoint Jesus, it was understood that this was not a small thing. First of all, we recognize that the oil that she used was imported. And the concern that they had was that why are we using this on Jesus when this would have brought much money in the marketplace, and we could have sold it and gave the money to the poor? This thought was exacerbated, no doubt, by Judas Iscariot, who loved to be in the midst of things. He was the treasurer of the 12 that followed Jesus. And somebody said that it was worth 300 denarii. And 1 denarii was a day's pay. And so 300 denarii was enough for the average worker to live off of for an entire year. They were mad. You wasting the oil on him. Well, first of all, Judas was, he picked 12. But one of them was a devil. Don't forget, when you got plans, you got to marginalize and give some room for the devil. Because if you're doing well, he's going to show up. Do I have a witness? The other 11 of the disciples, they were all Galileans. Judas was not. Judas was following Jesus for other reasons. And you need to know that even today, folk will follow you for other reasons. They followed Jesus because of his prestige and because of his esteem. They followed Jesus because they thought that he would be able to give them a reputation in society. They followed Jesus, some for what he was able to do, not because they had come to know him and love him like he loved them. And so Mary was hated by Judas. the disciple who understood and referred to the list of the 12. He was Simon, the son of Simon, who was called Iscariot. Judas was one that wanted to make it clear that if there's any money to be made, it need to come to me first. Around his waist was what we would call in modern times a fanny pack. And if they had sold the money would have been put into the treasury. The treasury was not at Bank of America. It was around his waist. John chapter number 12, verse number 6, it tells you the fact that Judas was a devil. He was a thief. He was an embezzler. He was a crook. Do I have a witness? And so some might want to ask the question, if Jesus knew he was a crook, why would he have him as part of his entourage? Well, I don't mean any harm, but many of us have sordid reputations of our past. And even though that was not the case with Judas, Judas was who Judas was intended to be, and that's why Jesus picked him. If it had not been for Judas, where Judas thought that he was getting over on Jesus, Jesus was getting over on Satan, because he knew that out of the 12, nobody would have gotten him to the cross but Judas. Judas had to have an interest in order to get what he wanted, knowing that the Pharisees and others sought to kill Jesus privately, and seeing Jesus now commending Mary for her gift of precious oil upon him, no doubt said in his mind, this is the last straw. Went to the Pharisees and began to negotiate with them for a price in order to give them Jesus. You see, I don't mean any harm, but many put too many emphasis on their enemies. But you don't have to be as concerned about your enemies. Those that don't like you, you know who they are. Do I have a witness? You only going to let them get so close to you. But if there is a moral to be gained, the moral would be watch out for who you call your friend. Are you praying with me? Judas went and sold Jesus out for a mere 30 pieces of silver. Walked with him in the Garden of Gethsemane. Knew where all of his favorite praying spots were. Do I have a witness? Only a friend can know those type of things. So watch out who you call your friend. Are you going to pray with me here just a little while? I don't mean any harm, but Jesus was betrayed by Judas. And Judas told the Pharisees that if you come with me in the wee hours of the night, I'll show you just who he is. Someone said, do you know him like that? Jesus said, when he looked up and saw him coming across the garden yard in the Garden of Gethsemane, friend, do you hear me? What are you coming for, my friend? Jesus was sold out by Judas, and Judas told the magistrate that whoever I kiss, I want you to hold him fast. You don't hear me? The reason I want you to hold him is because he's been known to do some stuff that nobody else can do. Do I have a witness? You got to move quickly when I kiss him. Make certain that you lock him down, that he can't move, because he'll get away in just a moment's notice. Do I have a witness? And I heard in the Garden of Gethsemane, I heard Judas walked across the garden yard with a whole host of Pharisees carrying their lanterns. He pointed out Jesus and kissed him on the cheek. Peter got angry, rose up and took his sword and cut the soldier's ear off. Do I have a witness? But I heard Jesus said, this is not the type of game we having. He reached down and did something that nobody else was able to do. Picked up the man's ear, put it back in place. Do I have a witness? Somebody said, this is him. I heard, I tell you, I heard Jesus is able to do miraculous things. Do I have a witness in the house? Don't give up when you're in the midst of darkness, because he will show up and brighten your way. Is that right? Don't give up when trials are hard, because he will bear your heavy load. I wish I had a witness in the house. Don't give up, great God, when men don't believe you, because he'll show up and show out every time. Do I have a witness? I got to close here, but I'm glad that he is a God that can control the rules of the water. Is that right? I'm glad he can speak to the storms, and the storm will obey him. You don't hear me? I'm glad we found out that the disciples was one that was so close to him until on a stormy night Jesus put them on a boat and told them to go on to the other side. Do I have a witness? And I heard while they were on their way, the wind started blowing and the waves started dancing, and I heard Peter looked out and saw a figure walking on the waves. Thought it was a ghost. Am I right about it? But I heard, I tell you, I heard Jesus said, don't worry about it. It's just me. Is that right? Aren't you glad he may not come when you want him to come, but he's always right on time. Is that right? I heard Peter increased his faith and said, Lord, if it be you, bid me that I might come out on the midst of the water to meet you. Is that right? Be careful how you pray. You just might get an answer that you didn't think you would get. Is that right? I heard Jesus said, come on the water. And I saw Peter step across the bow of the boat. stepped on water, made his way to Jesus. On his way, great God, the further he walked, the further back the boat was. The further he walked, the closer he was to his help. Do I have a witness? Every now and then you got to give up where you are in order to get where you need to be. Jesus will be right there. Is that right? And I heard Peter said, as he looked around, the boat got smaller and smaller. Is that all right? He looked up at the boisterous wind. He looked down at the tumultuous waves. I heard Peter said to himself, it's time to pray. You don't hear me? Everybody need to know that in time of crisis, it's a good time to pray. Is that right? In a time of trouble, it's a good time to pray. Don't worry, God will find you just in the nick of time. Is that all right? I heard as Peter began to pray, he had a new prayer. He didn't say, Father of Abraham, Father of Isaac, Father of Jacob, Nahum, and Issachar. Is that right? But I heard him cry out and said, Lord, save me. Is that all right? And he reached down and picked Peter up. Is that all right? I heard another crisis came. They were all on the boat and Jesus was asleep in the hull of the ship. But I heard somebody said the winds are still blowing, the waves are still dashing. Where is Jesus? Where is Jesus? They said he's asleep. Is that right? Go on and wake him up and ask Jesus, do you care if we perish? Is that right? And I heard Jesus rose and walked up on the deck and looked out on the troubling waves. He heard the boisterous wind beginning to blow. He said, peace, be still. Looked at the waves and said, behave yourself. And the waves came calm and serene. Is that right? And I heard somebody said, what manner of man is this? Is that right? Who can speak to the waves and the wind and they will obey him? Is that right? I heard Judas said, I'm going to kiss him, but I want you to hold him. Is that right? What a request. Somebody think you might be able to hold him. Is that right? You can't hold God. He's too big for you. You can't hold God. He's too much for you. He's so high, you can't get over him. He's so low, you can't get under him. He's so wide, you can't get around him. Is that all right? I tell you, I heard. He said, hold him fast. Is that right? But I heard Jesus said, you come to take my life, but you can't take it. But I come that you might have life, and that you might have it more abundantly. Is that right? Here's my hands. Is that right? Go ahead and take me. They tried Jesus all night long by a kangaroo court on trumped up charges. And he never said a mumbling word. Do I have a witness? Anybody in the house want to be a witness for the Lord? Isn't God all right? If he's all right, you ought to say yes. I'm a witness. The Lord is all right with me. Is that right? They tried him all night long. They led him from judgment hall to judgment hall. Is that right? They thought they could handle him. They took him to Pilate's court. Pilate said, I can't find no fault even in him. I heard Pilate said, why don't you speak up? I got the power to release you and to set you free. But Jesus said, you have no power except for that power that'll grant it from on high. Is that right? They led him out of Pilate's courtyard onto a street called the Via della Rosa, up to a hill called Calvary. They stretched him wide. They lifted him high. They dropped him low. And my Savior died. I said he died. That he died. One Friday.